Hello, everyone. My name is Kana Ulogachokiak. I am a member of the Caleb Scholars Program Steering Committee representing the Pungawi family. I am one of Caleb Pungawi's 9 children. Before we begin, it's important to provide a content warning. This training video contains generalized discussions of violence and harassment. We here at Caleb Scholars Program are committed to making this important training as accessible as possible. With that, our commitment to you is that in this presentation, we will use generalized discussion rather than specific examples to discuss violence and harassment. We will also commit to you that we will only use images that are nonviolent in nature. The main points of this presentation will be what is anti-violence, what is anti-harassment, what is victim blaming, how to support those who experience violence and harassment, and how to get support if violence or harassment occurs to you. So, what is anti-violence? To begin, anti-violence is active. Anti-violence, much like anti-racism, takes an active stance to address and resist violence in one's community. Taking an active stance can come in many forms, such as preventing violence, exposing violence, reporting violence, and importantly, supporting victims of violence. Violence prevention includes how we respond to violence and how we respond to those affected by violence. It is important to consider privilege, positionality, and power when it comes to violence, especially when it comes to the potential risks associated with anti-violence action. To briefly review, privilege is the relative unearned benefits and advantages that an individual may have. Positionality is a consideration of one's position or role in any given circumstance they're in. And power, or the actual ability to act in any given situation, is a result of one's privilege and positionality. Sometimes the risks associated with anti-violence action are tangible and need to be considered carefully. Those calculations are up for you to decide for yourself and may change with time and experience. However, if you take the time to really consider your privilege, your positionality, and your power within each situation that you're in, you will be better equipped to make these decisions. Anti-violence action recognizes that violence is often a reflection and a result of systemic oppression. This recognition does not let perpetrators off the hook. Instead, it recognizes that historic and current systemic oppression, such as sexism, racism, bigotry, etc., plays a significant role in the disenfranchisement and othering of individuals and contributes to violence. Desperate people sometimes make desperate and terrible choices. Entitled people also make terrible choices. And that's the key. We must understand that while many things contribute to and amplify violence, violence is a choice. There are a lot of other ways, non-violent ways, to resolve hurt, anger, fear, and frustration. Violence is never the solution. So, what is anti-harassment? Just like anti-racism and anti-violence, anti-harassment is active. Harassment can be difficult to spot, but it typically revolves around actions that someone does that makes another person feel uncomfortable. Harassment occurs because of poor boundaries, or this person might have a sense of entitlement and believe that they have a right to act whichever way they want, regardless of its effect on other people. Remember, everyone deserves respect. Respect for others' boundaries and respect for your own boundaries are important components in stopping harassment. Be assertive. Shut down harassment as soon as possible. If you are subjected to any rude, demeaning, cringy, or inappropriate behaviors, consider speaking up about it. Be assertive in nonviolent ways and shut it down as soon as you can. Remember, you should consider the privilege, positionality, and power that is involved in the situation before deciding what actions you might want to take. People who are not corrected or called on their bad behaviors will likely continue to do problematic things. You can call people in or you can call people out. What you choose is really up to you depending on the circumstance. If you have a good relationship with the person who is behaving in an offensive manner, you may want to use a calling in technique. That means you really just gently let them know that what they've done is inappropriate. Calling in, though, works best if you know that the person is generally willing to consider their behaviors, admit mistakes, and change. Examples of calling in might sound like, "Hey, when you tell me jokes like that, you make me feel really uncomfortable." Or, "I like you, but we need to set some boundaries." If the offending action is just too extra, then calling out may be what you need to do. Calling out takes many forms and can often involve seeking outside help, such as reporting an offense to someone official or asking a friend or an ally to help you confront somebody. Some people call people out by blasting them publicly. Whatever you choose, make sure to think before you act and make the best choices that you can. Intervene if others are being harassed. If you see something, say something. It's important to use the power that you do have to help others. For example, you have power as a witness to an upsetting interaction. Just because it is somebody else that is the target of harassing behavior does not mean that you should remain a bystander. Be courageous. It is important to intervene if you see something inappropriate happening around you. And remember to check yourself. Boundaries can be confusing things because a lot of boundaries go unstated. Before you act in a way that may cross a boundary, pause and think before you speak and act. Consider the impacts of your actions before you act. Determine whether your comments or actions could be viewed as insulting or inappropriate before making them. Once again, considering privilege, positionality, and power can really help you with this work. However, if you do make a mistake and cross a boundary, apologize and change your behavior. What is victim blaming? Victim blaming unfairly faults the victim for the violence or harassment that is committed against them. Victim blaming places the responsibility for violence or harassment on the victim rather than on the one who enacted it. What does victim blaming sound like? Why did you wear that outfit? Why did you talk to that person? Why did you wear headphones? Why did you go somewhere alone? Questions like that suggest that by wearing clothes, being friendly, listening to music, and carrying out one's daily activities somehow invites violence and harassment. This is messed up. Everyone, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual identity, whatever, deserves to live their lives without fear of violence or harassment. It is not the victim's fault, even if they're mouthy, even if they're sexy, even if they're overly friendly, even if they're careless. The fault lies solely on those that do violence or harassment. Enacting violence is a choice. Being the victim of violence or harassment is not. Victim blaming is itself an act of violence. This type of violence is rooted in societal oppression. This includes incorrect notions such as women are the property of men, that people's bodies are shameful or inherently sexual, that people's boundaries are negotiable, that boys will be boys, which is really saying that men better perform masculinity in toxic ways or they aren't real men, that racial minorities are inherently violent, unstable, ignorant, and disposable, that LGBTQ plus people are unnatural or misguided. All of these notions are violent and wrong. Not all who commit victim blaming realize that what they're doing is violent. Unfortunately, this type of violence often occurs while trying to help victims of violence or harassment. What often happens is that people try to make sense of violence and harassment, and it comes out in really inappropriate and insensitive ways. However, victim blaming is the major culprit in violence and harassment, and not being reported is what happens because of victim blaming. Victim blaming reduces the likelihood that victims will report violence or harassment because they are led to believe that their experience is somehow their own fault. Remember, enacting violence and harassment is a choice. Being the victim of violence and harassment is not. How can you support victims of violence and harassment? You can support them by listening to them. Your job as a supporter is to listen and believe, not to listen and question. If you start with believing, you quiet your inner critical voice and you can actually listen to their experience. It is really important to let people say what they need to say in the way that they need to say it. Your job is to validate their experience through listening, regardless of how you might personally feel about what they're telling you. You can ask questions, but do so very carefully. You do not want to cause further harm by enacting victim blaming violence. Kind phrases are, "I believe you. I'm so sorry that happened. That's terrible." Not so kind phrases fall along the lines of, "So-and-so did what? I can't believe that they would do something like that." Often when people that we care about tell us something that is difficult to hear, our inner fixer starts making plans to try to solve their problem. However, this is not your problem to solve. Your job is to listen. Do not pressure victims to do anything that they do not want to do, including reporting. They've already been through enough. They do not need a guilt trip on top of everything else. Not everybody chooses to report violence or harassment. And as unfortunate as that is, it's not your job to make it happen. Your job is to listen. You can ask them things like, "How can I support you right now?" A question like that opens up space for them to think about any next moves that they might want to make, and then maybe ask you for help. Now, you may have your own set of thoughts, feelings, ideas, questions, experiences, and traumas associated with hearing about violence or harassment. However, now is not the time for you to tell them about any of these things unless you are specifically asked. This moment, even if it triggers you, is not about you. It's about them. That being said, self-care is important. It is okay to need a break. If you need a little time to collect yourself, say so. You can say something as simple as, I need to take a few minutes to gather myself so I can better focus on you. Finally, it is okay if you do not know what to do, and it is okay if you make mistakes. Simply saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and refocusing on them is often a good start to righting a wrong. Having compassion for them and for yourself will go a long way in everyone's healing. How can you get support if you experience violence or harassment? There are a lot of ways. Getting support is really important, but how you choose to get that support is really up to you. Please know that you are not alone and that there are options available to you. Remember, it is not your fault. Nobody has the right to violate you, your boundaries, or commit violence against you, no matter the circumstance. Reach out to someone you trust, but remember, what you share and who you share it with is your choice. Documenting the incident will be helpful if you choose to report. Take photos of any injuries or record interactions. Keep records of emails, texts, calls, and store them in a secure location. Consider seeking medical attention or counseling. Violence and harassment can have many physical and emotional impacts. There are free and confidential counseling programs available at most universities and with local and national organizations. You can Google victim of violence support or victim of harassment support and the name of your location, your city, to locate local services. So the point of this whole presentation is really to stress one simple fact. We all deserve to be safe. Safety comes through acts of love, respect, sharing, cooperation, responsibility, and humility, among others. Love, respect, sharing, cooperation, responsibility, and humility, among others, are also acts that embody our Inuit values. Here are some helpful anti-violence and anti-harassment resources to help get you started, should you be interested in learning more. And thank you so much for listening. I wish you all the best in everything that you do. Also, thank you for participating in the Caleb Scholars Program and for continuing my father's legacy of kindness and advocacy.